In this video, we're going to talk about the convergence-divergence cycle. When you understand this and you implement it into your life and your work, it can absolutely transform the way you operate, the way you think, the way you make decisions, and the quality of your output. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to start by looking at what the convergence-divergence cycle is, why it's important, how it works. Next, we'll look at the two types of divergence, and then we'll look at how this cycle, the convergence-divergence cycle, can be applied across multiple types of work or multiple types of thinking. So planning at a high level, and also problem solving or in the weeds creative work, like putting together a YouTube video like this. Following that, we will look at how to maximize divergence and also how to maximize convergence. Okay, so what is the convergence-divergence cycle? Well, to understand the cycle, we need to start by understanding what convergence is and what divergence is. Now, I'm using these terms strictly in the sense of work and thinking. So when I say divergence, I'm not referring to something like neurodivergence, which is another topic all on its own, okay? I'm just referring to the actions. Divergent work, convergent work. Divergent thinking, convergent thinking. Divergence can be defined as open, curious, creative, exploratory. It's more intuitive than it is rational. It's more passive than active. It's not goal-oriented, or it's far less goal-oriented than convergence is. It's wide, not narrow. Convergence, on the other hand, is pure execution. It's doing. It's closed. It's quantitative. It's narrow. It's rational, right? It's focused and it's heavily goal-oriented and goal-centric. So divergence might be free-form journaling in a notebook, brainstorming, the early stages of creative work, particularly ideation, some parts of strategic planning, having a conversation with someone. Convergent work might be something like editing the draft of your essay, setting up automations and managing systems in your business that are very logical and defined, emailing clients, bookkeeping. You get the idea. Now, of course, a lot of work that we do exists in the overlap between the two, which is why this is a Venn diagram, not two separate circles. But even then, a lot of this type of work should be, I think, separated into discrete tasks. For example, if you want to write an article, then the first phase of that project, of that task, is quite divergent. You're thinking, you're ideating, maybe you're brainstorming, and if you try and edit at the same time, which is a much more convergent activity, in my opinion, then you're just not going to get the best of either world. But of course, you can't separate this completely. And there are some tasks like strategic planning in your business that require both at the same time. Like you're thinking creatively, but you're also thinking rationally and so on and so forth. This overlap aside, the productive knowledge worker is an expert at oscillating between these two states and types of work as needed. They can step back, diverge, reorient, and then converge again with drive and intensity before coming back up above the surface again to enter divergence. If this sounds similar to the idea of productivity sprints, which I've talked about in previous videos, that's because it is. Work, then rest and think and reorient and then repeat. Most people don't operate this way. They don't operate on this cycle to their detriment. See, in the world of modern knowledge work, effectiveness has more value than efficiency. It's not just about how fast or how hard you work, though that's important. It's also about what you work on. What you work on and how you work on it is a form of leverage. And this form of leverage is usually only found through this cycle of convergence and divergence. Because the way to figure out what to work on is not a process of pure, convergent, systematic, rational thinking. It's often divergent, at least it has been for me and the people I work with. It requires stepping away from the tactical day-to-day and viewing things at 30,000 feet and letting your mind wander to places where it wouldn't when you're just busy all the time. So few of us do this. We get caught up in the hum of consistent execution that we never cycle through to divergence. We stay busy, we tick tasks off the to-do list, and If we're not careful, it can start to feel like a hamster wheel. On the other side of the spectrum, you have those who spend all their time in divergence. They're constantly thinking, constantly theorizing, planning, dreaming, but never converging on anything and actually doing. This is arguably a worse position to be in because at least the busy, overly convergent person exists in motion and ends up getting some results, even if there's not much leverage or even if it burns them out a little bit. But when you intelligently move back and forth between convergence and divergence, you avoid both traps and you get the best of both worlds. You benefit from expansive, creative, open thinking that illuminates the path of leverage and provides useful solutions to problems. And then you convert those insights and impulses into real tactical action. Now, when it comes to divergence, there are two main types. There's undirected divergence. So this is where you have no particular goal. You let things flow where they may. For example, just the other day, I took a break from work and I was sitting outside on the grass reading a book that led to an insight about something, about a plan that I had, a long-term goal. And I just started taking notes on that and thinking through it. And I just got in a state of like flow and creativity for half an hour and wrote down some great stuff. It had nothing to do with the book. So the book just sparked an insight that then kind of evolved into something else. That was very undirected. There was no particular goal. I was taking a break. I was doing some reading just for fun. And that's where things led. And it was a great result. And then there's directed divergence. This is where you have a particular goal or problem you want to solve or something you want to think about and ponder. Can be vaguely defined. It doesn't have to be super specific, but you want to approach it in an open, expansive, and lateral way. So let's look at a few examples, starting with the macro application of this cycle. So let's imagine that you want to plan out the next 12 weeks of your life and your work. Maybe you run a business, so you want to grow that, you want to work on some projects. You're not super happy with how the last 12 weeks has gone, and so you have some problems you want to solve or bottlenecks you may want to remove, and you're not exactly sure what to work on either. The path isn't 100% clear. All you know is that you would benefit from having a robust plan instead of passively winging it over the next 12 weeks. The non-convergent divergent cycle way to do this is to try and rationally plan everything out from the very start, to set a goal, identify the systems that support it, potential roadblocks, so on and so forth, and just like systematically work and cascade through those things. The convergent divergent way to do it is to start in a non-goal oriented state, or at least a far less goal oriented state. You have the vague idea that you want to plan out the next 12 weeks. And so you step back, at least for a moment, and you start to explore. You ask yourself, what are the possibilities? What could I work on? What excites me? What's been on my mind recently? What have I been reading about? What have I been watching on YouTube? What podcasts have I been listening to? What am I very curious about? And so you don't start sitting in front of your computer with a template like my quarterly planning template, which you can grab in the description below. Instead, maybe you go to the beach or you go to a park and you sit down with your notebook. You might have a few prompts or questions to work through. You don't have any particular goal or outcome other than that vague, I should, create a plan for the next 12 weeks. You don't say to yourself, I must have a productive session of divergence because that misses the point. You just relax. And likely you come away with a bunch of thoughts and ideas. And what you're really searching for during this process of divergence is emotional resonance. That goal, that project, that strategy that lights you up and makes you really excited, which is hard to find through purely convergent, rational, logical thinking, which underrates emotional resonance and curiosity. And so you start wide, you start divergent, right? Maybe you've found a path, maybe you haven't, but either way, at some point, as part of your plan, you need to converge. You need to define what needs to be done. What are the systems that are required to ensure that I succeed with this plan? And so you start to converge and be a bit more rational about things. But you've started with divergence, which has allowed you to find that higher leverage goal. Let me quickly give you a real world example. Someone I know who runs a marketing agency came to me the other day and he said he was incredibly busy. He felt like he was on the hamster wheel of constantly doing work, right? Everything felt urgent. Now, he knew about the productivity hacks. He'd tried implementing some, but he just couldn't seem to get on top of things psychologically. Now, I knew exactly what he needed because I've seen it time and time again with clients and also in myself. And that is that he had a problem, which was that he was busy and caught up in everything. And the only real way to solve that problem is by stepping back and taking the 30,000 foot view, because everyone who feels overly busy is always doing at least some things that don't need to be done. But to identify what those are and to identify solutions to the busyness, you often need to step back into divergence first. And so that's what I recommended he do. I essentially told him, as soon as you can, you need to escape your office. You need to take a pen and a notebook somewhere. Do not take your laptop. Go to a cafe just for an hour and just think through some of the ways you can tackle this, all of the ways you can tackle this. List them all out. Again, divergence, right? You're trying to be creative about this. You will feel like you don't have time to do this. You'll feel too busy. You might even feel guilty about it, but there's no way you'll get in on top of things without doing this. And so that's what he did. He took the advice, and then 2 weeks later, he told me that his productivity had basically doubled, partly due to this session of divergent problem solving, as well as some other implementations that were made. And this leads nicely into a graphic that I found from Asana, which is titled The Creative Cycle of Convergent and Divergent Thinking. And you can see this oscillation, right? You start, you discover what are all the possible causes of this problem. So maybe you're very busy and it's like, why am I so busy? What am I doing? Where am I spending my time? Well, I've got a bunch of clients and I'm spending a lot of time on email. It's like, okay, divergence. You've thought expansively about it. And then you converge. Okay, what is the main bottleneck here? What can I define as the worthy problem to solve? And then you diverge again. Okay, well, how can I solve this? There's got to be multiple ways, right? And so you list them all out, and then you converge again and you determine what is the best solution to this problem. You can apply this in so many ways, and you can apply it not just to problem solving. It applies to creative work. And as an example, like when I make videos, I go through this cycle of divergence and convergence. What a lot of people do when they make content is they will have an idea and then they'll just start writing or they'll outline or whatever. I like to take a different approach, and I spend a lot more time just sort of starting wide, brainstorming. I use Obsidian Canvas for this reason, because the medium is different. It's non-linear. And if you looked at my process, especially in the early stages of ideation, it would look a little bit unproductive. Like I might write something, I might get up and speak to my laptop using Super Whisper AI, and then I might grab a book off the bookshelf that I think is relevant. I might skip through a few pages. Maybe I don't find anything. Maybe I do. Maybe I find something that completely changes direction of that piece of content. But I just embrace that, right? It's divergent. At some point, that converges and it starts to turn into an actual piece of content. I outline, right? So I go from brainstorming wide to outline, which is convergence. Once the outline's done, it's kind of like back into a creative divergence phase where I write the first draft and maybe it changes direction again. How you do this in your own work is really up to you to define. All I would say is just embrace it. Like embrace that oscillation between convergence and divergence. And if you need to be a little bit more intentional about it, then do so. Like I intentionally start divergently. I intentionally do not start with just notes or just an outline. I like to go wide on the canvas and explore and come across something that really captures my attention. Okay, let's wrap things up by quickly talking about how to maximize divergence and convergence. So a few of these I've alluded to. The first is that you want less structure and more variance. If you want to be creative, if you want to think creatively, if you want to encourage your mind to go to new places, then you want to change things up. You want a different environment, ideally. Not to say that you can't be divergent in your normal workplace or office. You absolutely can. These are just things that help, right? So I like to read and take notes and stuff outside, away from this room, away from the office, or I'll go away for a weekend somewhere else, Airbnb, or go for a walk or whatever. That's why I said to this busy marketing agency owner, hey, you need to get out of your office, go to a cafe, change things up, because there's so much like cognitive baggage associated with this place where you're so busy. Different medium. If you normally use a laptop, then grab a notebook and like a pen, or talk to your phone, like a voice memos app or something. Just try different things. Variance, right? Vary what you do. Likewise, different approach. Perhaps you start every project a certain way, or start every workday a certain way. Try changing it up. It might maximize creativity. It might not work at all, but you should give it a go. Another useful thing for divergent work and thinking can be prompts and questions. There's plenty of these that you can find on the internet. An example might be, in the context of planning, how would the best version of me approach this, say the next 12 weeks? Or you're dealing with a problem, what would the most courageous version of me do? If I had 20% of the time, what would I do differently? And that one that we saw from Asana just before, what are all the possible ways to solve this? Or what are all the possible problems? And so having a few of these questions on hand can be useful to spark your mind and push it in different directions. You want to follow your curiosity without judgment. When you're in a state of convergence, what you often do is you'll be working on something and then you'll have an idea and then you'll suppress that idea because you're working on the task at hand. And this is not a bad thing to do, because if you constantly followed that impulse, then you'll never finish anything. You'll always be being pulled around by whatever's interesting, whatever captures your attention. It's also called shiny object syndrome. When you're in a divergent state intentionally and you're trying to practice divergence, you want to follow that impulse. You don't want to have a super defined goal unless you're doing that directed divergence we talked about earlier, unless you're trying to solve a specific problem. You want to follow those curiosities and follow those impulses, because where they lead can be extremely valuable, can be extremely high leverage. Some of the best decisions I've made, some of the best projects I've worked on have come out of this, non-judgmental following of curiosity to see where it leads. Half of the videos on this channel are a result of doing that. And then finally, I would just say do it in a state of relaxation and rest. The more calm you are, the more rested you are, the more optimistic you are, the more joyful you are, the better it's going to be. I find it extremely hard to think divergently and be creative if I am tired, fatigued, angry, frustrated, stressed. And so I will always delay that type of work if I'm in that state. One thing to point out is that useful divergence follows intense convergence. So it is important to work hard. It's important to bang your head against the wall to some extent and struggle a little, because that's what allows for good divergence. It's something that Graham Wallace in The Art of Thought, a very old book, but a great book, he calls it incubation, right? He looks at these scientists, these inventors, and he's like, pretty much all these guys worked really hard on something, then they got stuck, then they stepped away from it, and then it worked in the background, in the subconscious. And so you want to do that. You want to converge, you want to work on something so that you give your subconscious something to work on, and your conscious mind as well, so that when you sit down with the notebook, all these thoughts just start flooding in. You've got all this like data that sits just below the surface that now can inform you and inform the next steps. Okay, how to maximize convergence. This is sort of where the more traditional productivity advice comes in. You want more structure and less variance. So routine, structured work blocks, all that kind of stuff. You want a clearly defined goal and task. You want to outline this if necessary and go from vague to specific. One killer of productivity is when you say to yourself, I'm going to work for 3 hours straight, I'm going to focus, but you've only vaguely defined what you're doing. And so it might be like, I'm going to work on growing my YouTube channel. It's like, well, what does that even mean? You probably need to make a video. So be more specific. I'm going to outline in my video topic, I'm going to write the first draft, and I'm going to set myself up to record it, right? Outline that, get specific. It allows you to stay on task and really converge and focus. Make commitments and work on them until they're completed. I'm not talking like 5-year commitments. I'm talking like micro commitments, all right, for the next 3 days, this is all I'm going to work on. And I'm not going to allow myself to be pulled back into planning mode and brainstorming mode unless absolutely necessary, because that is a killer of productivity when you get pulled off course prematurely. If you're someone who struggles to finish things, then this is very important. You do not want to go back to divergent thinking and go back to the drawing board all the time. You need to finish things. One way to make this a little bit less tempting if you struggle with this is to schedule in divergence time. So you might say, okay, here's my commitment. On Saturday afternoon, I'm going to go and I'm going to do some more planning, or I'm going to brainstorm this. But until then, I have things to do and I'm going to execute. And then finally, use whatever you can to support this process, whether it's accountability, whether it's coaching, timers, Pomodoro technique, focus music, caffeine, whatever helps you execute better is important, especially as it pertains to convergence. So that is basically it for this video. But I want to leave you with some homework, let's say. Given what you know about the convergence-divergence cycle now, figure out how you're going to implement it in your work schedule, in your life. Maybe it means taking some time this week to enter that divergent state. Just sit with just pen and paper and think and brainstorm and be creative. Maybe you're spending too much time in that state and you actually need to converge on something and just push and execute. Have a think about it divergently. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.